3 days after my son told me to get out of his life, he found the note. By then, I was gone. The little yellow note sat in the center of his kitchen table, exactly where I had left it. He walked past it twice before finally picking it up. At first, he thought it was just another message from me. Maybe a grocery list, maybe a reminder, maybe another apology. After all, that's what mothers do, right? We apologize, even when we've done nothing wrong. But this note was different. The moment he read the first line, the color drained from his face. His wife asked what was wrong. He couldn't answer. He just kept staring at the paper. Then he grabbed his car keys and ran out the door. Unfortunately for him, he was already too late. Because for the first time in 38 years, I had chosen myself. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 68 years old. And 3 days before that note was found, my son stood in our front yard and shouted words I never thought I would hear. Words that changed everything. Old woman, go live your life. The neighbors heard him. The mailman heard him. Even the little girl riding her bicycle across the street stopped to stare. For a moment, the entire world seemed to go silent. I remember looking at my son, not the angry man standing in front of me. I saw the little boy I used to carry on my hip, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms, the little boy who once told his kindergarten teacher that his mother was his hero. And somehow that little boy was gone. Standing in his place was a stranger who looked at me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience. His wife stood behind him with her arms crossed. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The smile on her face said enough. I could feel dozens of eyes watching from nearby windows, waiting, listening, judging. Maybe some of them expected me to scream. Maybe they expected me to remind him of everything I had sacrificed. Maybe they expected a scene. Instead, I simply nodded. I looked at my son and said 5 words. Okay, Daniel, I understand. His face showed surprise. Perhaps he expected a fight. Perhaps he wanted one. But I was suddenly too tired to argue. Not physically tired. My soul is tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from loving someone more than they love you. The kind of exhaustion that builds over years. Years of excuses. Years of disappointments. Years of pretending things would get better. I turned around and walked back into the house. The house felt strangely quiet. I stood in the kitchen and rested my hands on the counter. The same kitchen where I had baked Daniel's birthday cakes. The same kitchen where I had helped him with homework. The same kitchen where I had sat awake all night waiting for him to come home safely. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing, thinking, remembering. Then I made a decision that should have been made years earlier. I walked into my bedroom. I opened the closet, pulled an old suitcase from the top shelf, and began packing. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because for the first time in my life, I realized something painful. My son had been telling me exactly how he felt for years. I had simply refused to listen. The shouting wasn't the beginning, it was the ending. The final chapter of a story that had started long before that afternoon. And as I folded my clothes into that suitcase, I finally accepted a truth that had been standing in front of me all along. The son I loved wasn't coming back. The little boy I remembered no longer existed. By sunset, I had packed everything I truly needed. By midnight, I had written the note. And before dawn, I was gone. Completely gone. But if you think this story is about revenge, you're wrong. Because what happened next shocked everyone, including me. To understand why my son shouted those words, and why one simple note changed his life forever. You first need to understand everything that happened before that day. You need to understand the sacrifices, the promises, the warnings I ignored. and the woman who slowly convinced my son that I no longer belonged in his life. 28 years earlier, my world looked very different. I was 40 years old. My husband, Michael, had been gone for just 6 months, and every morning I woke up hoping the pain would somehow hurt less. It never did. Grief doesn't disappear because you're ready. It disappears when it's finished teaching you something. Back then, I wasn't ready for any lessons. I was simply trying to survive, especially for my son. Daniel was 10 years old when his father died. 10. Far too young to understand loss. Far too young to carry the weight that suddenly landed on his shoulders. For months after the funeral, he slept with the hallway light on, every night. He never admitted he was afraid, but I knew. A mother always knows. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find him standing quietly outside my bedroom door, just standing there, making sure I was still home, making sure I hadn't disappeared too. Those were difficult years. Michael had left us love, but he hadn't left us money. The mortgage remained, the bills remained, the responsibilities remained. Only the man who helped carry them was gone. I worked wherever I could. Morning shifts at a diner, afternoon bookkeeping for a local hardware store, weekend cleaning jobs. Some days I worked 16 hours, some days 18. I remember coming home so exhausted that my legs shook climbing the porch steps. But every time I opened the front door and saw Daniel waiting for me, I found the strength to keep going. He never complained, not once. Even when things were hard, even when his friends had things we couldn't afford, even when I had to tell him no, especially then. One Christmas stands out in my memory. Daniel was 13. All he wanted was a new bicycle, the kind his friends rode around town. I spent weeks pretending I might be able to buy it. The truth was, I couldn't. There simply wasn't enough money. On Christmas Eve, I wrapped a pair of gloves and a second-hand baseball glove instead. I felt like a failure. That night, after he opened the gifts, I apologized. I told him I was sorry I couldn't give him more. Do you know what he said? He hugged me. Then he smiled and said, "Mom, you already gave me everything." For years, that memory carried me through my hardest days. Because I believed him. I believed I had raised a good man, a grateful man, a kind man. And for a long time, I was right. Daniel worked hard in school. I made good grades, stayed out of trouble. When he graduated high school, I cried harder than anyone in the audience. Not because he was leaving childhood behind, because we had survived together. Every sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. Then came college. Daniel got accepted into a university nearly 3 hours away. I was proud, terrified, and excited all at once. The tuition wasn't fully covered. There were gaps, big gaps, the kind that makes single mothers stare at bills in the middle of the night. I could have told him no. I could have asked him to stay closer to home. Instead, I sold the last piece of jewelry Michael had ever given me, my wedding ring. I still remember holding it in my hand before walking into the pawn shop. 30 years of memories sitting in the palm of my hand. The ring wasn't worth much money, but it represented an entire life, a marriage, a family, a promise, and I let it go because my son had dreams, and I refused to be the reason he couldn't reach them. Daniel never knew. I never told him. Some sacrifices aren't meant to become debts. They're simply acts of love. Years passed. College became graduation. Graduation became a career. And before long, Daniel was earning more money in a year than I had earned in 5. The first time he bought me dinner with his own paycheck, I cried in the restaurant bathroom. Not because of the food, because I was proud, because all those years of struggle seemed to mean something. He looked across the table that night and said something I'll never forget. "Mom, one day I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me." I believed him, every word, and honestly, for a while he meant it. He called every Sunday, visited often, helped fix things around the house, remembered birthdays, remembering Mother's Day, remembering me. Whenever people complimented him, I'd smile and think the same thing. We made it. We really made it. But life has a strange way of changing people. Not all at once, not overnight, little by little, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. And looking back now, I can see exactly when everything started to change. It began the summer Daniel introduced me to a woman named Vanessa, the woman who would eventually become his wife, the woman who smiled warmly the first time we met, the woman who called me mom before she even married my son, the woman I welcomed into our family with an open heart. If only I had known what was coming. If only I had understood that some storms don't arrive with thunder. Some arrive smiling. And by the time you recognize the danger, they've already changed everything. The first time I met Vanessa, she arrived carrying a homemade blueberry pie. Looking back, I almost laugh at the memory. Not because it was funny, because it was such a perfect performance. She smiled warmly, complimented my home, asked questions about my life, even hugged me goodbye. That evening after she left, Daniel called me. So, what do you think? I remember smiling. She's lovely. At the time, I meant it. And maybe part of her really was lovely. Maybe that's what makes betrayal so difficult. The people who hurt us aren't always monsters. Sometimes they're simply selfish people who slowly teach others to become selfish too. Over the next year, Vanessa became a regular part of our lives. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, Sunday afternoons. She was everywhere. And at first, everything seemed normal. If anything, Daniel appeared happier than ever. He laughed more, we talked about the future, started discussing marriage. As a mother, that should have made me happy, and it did. I wanted him to build a life. I wanted him to find someone to love. I wanted him to have the family Michael and I had once dreamed about. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly being removed from the picture. Not all at once, never all at once. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it happened in tiny pieces. The kind of pieces you don't notice until they're gone. The Sunday phone calls became every other Sunday, then once a month, then whenever he remembered. The visits became shorter, then less frequent, then almost non existent. At first, I blamed adulthood. People get busy, people have responsibilities. That's what I told myself. Then came my 65th birthday. I remember it clearly. I spent the entire morning cleaning the house, made Daniel's favorite lasagna, bought a small cake, even ironed my best tablecloth. He promised he'd come by after work. 6 o'clock came, then 7, then 8. No Daniel, no phone call, no text, nothing. I sat alone at the dining table staring at a birthday cake with untouched candles. By 10 o'clock, I finally called him. Straight to voicemail. The next morning, he called back. Oh, Mom, I'm sorry. Vanessa and I completely forgot. Forgot. I told him it was okay, because that's what mothers do. We pretend things don't hurt. After hanging up, I threw away the cake. I remember watching it slide into the trash. Something about that moment felt symbolic. Like I wasn't throwing away cake, I was throwing away expectations. But I still made excuses for him. I always did. Then there was Thanksgiving. For 30 years, Thanksgiving happened in my house, every year, without exception. Suddenly, Vanessa wanted to host, which was fine. I had no problem with that. But a week before the holiday, Daniel called. Mom, we're keeping it small this year. I didn't understand. What does that mean? There was a pause. The kind of pause people use when they're trying not to tell the truth. It'll just be Vanessa's family. I sat quietly, waiting. Surely he wasn't serious. Surely he would add that I was invited too. He didn't. For the first time in my life, I spent Thanksgiving alone. I ate leftovers from the freezer while looking at old family photographs. One picture showed Daniel at 8 years old, covered in pumpkin pie filling. Another showed Michael carving a turkey. I sat there staring at those photos for hours, trying to understand how I had become a guest in my own family. Then something happened that opened my eyes. A few months later, I ran into one of Daniel's coworkers at the grocery store. We exchanged small talk. Then she smiled and said something strange. "It was so nice meeting you at the engagement party." I frowned. Engagement party? Her smile disappeared. The poor woman immediately realized her mistake. "Oh, I thought you knew." I didn't. No one had told me. My own son had hosted an engagement party, and I hadn't been invited. I drove home in silence. The steering wheel blurred through my tears. Not because of the party itself, because I wasn't even worth informing. That realization stayed with me for weeks. When I finally confronted Daniel, he acted annoyed. "Mom, it wasn't a big deal." Not a big deal. His engagement wasn't a big deal. I wanted to ask him when I had become optional, but I didn't, because I was afraid of the answer. The wedding came 6 months later, and that was when I first saw the real Vanessa. Not the smiling version, not the polite version, the real one. The wedding was beautiful, expensive, elegant, far beyond anything I could have afforded. I still contributed money because Daniel asked. Nearly $10,000. Money I had spent years saving. Not because I had to, because I wanted to help, because I was his mother. The ceremony itself was lovely. The reception was different. Every time I tried taking a photo with Daniel, Vanessa interrupted. Every time I joined a conversation, she redirected it. Every time I got close to my son, she somehow appeared between us. At one point, I overheard her speaking to one of her friends. I wasn't meant to hear it. Maybe that's why it hurt so much. She glanced toward me and laughed. Daniel's mom still acts like he's 12. Her friend laughed too. Then Vanessa added something I'll never forget. "Some people just don't know when to let go." I stood there holding a glass of iced tea, frozen, because suddenly I understood. This wasn't about schedules or busy lives or adulthood. Vanessa didn't want me close to Daniel. And slowly, year after year, she had been winning. The worst part, Daniel never noticed. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just found it easier to stay silent. And that silence would eventually cost all of us more than he could imagine. Especially him. Because the day he told me to go live my own life wasn't the beginning of our story. It was the result of years of choices. Choices that were about to become far more expensive than anyone expected. A year after the wedding, Vanessa announced she was pregnant. When Daniel called with the news, I cried. Not because I was emotional, because I was happy, truly happy. For months, I walked around with a smile that wouldn't leave my face. I was going to be a grandmother. The thought filled every corner of my heart. I started planning immediately. I bought baby clothes, tiny socks, little blankets, stuffed animals. I even found myself standing in stores staring at things no baby actually needed. But that's what grandparents do. We spoil, we dream, we love before we've even met the child. For the first time in years, I felt excited about the future. Maybe this baby would bring our family closer together. Maybe everything would change. Maybe I would finally feel included again. I couldn't have been more wrong. The day Vanessa went into labor, I sat by my phone waiting. Hours passed, then more hours. No call, no text, nothing. Finally, around midnight, Daniel called. "It's a girl." I nearly screamed with joy. A girl? Oh my goodness. I immediately asked which hospital they were at. Silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "Actually, Vanessa wants some privacy right now." Privacy. I told myself that was reasonable. Hospitals are stressful. New mothers need rest. I understood. At least I tried to. 3 days later, I still hadn't seen my granddaughter. 1 week later, I still hadn't seen her. 2 weeks later, I finally asked Daniel directly, "When can I meet her?" Another pause. Always those pauses. "Vanessa thinks we should wait a little longer." My smile disappeared. Wait for what? I was her grandmother, not a stranger, not a neighbor, not a distant cousin. Her grandmother. Yet somehow everyone else had already met her. Vanessa's parents, her sisters, her friends, people I barely knew. But not me. 3 weeks later, I finally held my granddaughter. Her name was Lily. The moment Daniel placed her in my arms, my heart melted. She had his eyes, the same eyes he had when he was a baby, the same eyes that once looked at me with complete trust. I stared at her tiny face and whispered a promise. "I'll always be here for you." At the time, I meant every word. I just didn't realize how difficult keeping that promise would become. As Lily grew, seeing her became strangely complicated. Every visit required permission. Every phone call felt scheduled. Every invitation seemed controlled. Nothing happened naturally anymore. I couldn't simply stop by. I couldn't ask Daniel directly. Everything went through Vanessa. Always Vanessa. At first, I ignored it. Then I noticed something else. Whenever I visited, Vanessa never left us alone, not once. If Lily sat on my lap, Vanessa sat nearby. If I read her a book, Vanessa watched. If I gave her a gift, Vanessa would inspect it. The atmosphere always felt tense, as though I were being evaluated. One afternoon, I brought Lily a handmade quilt. I had spent nearly 2 months making it, every stitch sewn by hand, every piece of fabric as carefully chosen. It was one of the most beautiful things I had ever made. Lily loved it instantly. She wrapped herself in it and laughed. My heart nearly burst. A week later, I visited again. The quilt was gone. I asked where it was. Vanessa shrugged. "We donated it." I stared at her. "Donated it? Why?" She smiled. "It didn't really match the nursery." Didn't match the nursery. Those words hurt more than they should have. Because it wasn't about a blanket. It was about what the blanket represented. Time, love, effort, part of me. And she had thrown it away because it didn't fit her color scheme. Daniel sat there listening, saying nothing. Again, always saying nothing. As the years passed, things became worse. Birthday parties became smaller, then exclusive, then selective, until eventually I wasn't invited at all. The first time it happened, Daniel claimed it was an oversight. The second time, he blamed miscommunication. The third time, he didn't bother explaining. One afternoon, I opened social media and saw photos from Lily's 7th birthday party. A huge celebration. Bounce houses, face painting, dozens of guests. Daniel smiling, Vanessa smiled, Lily smiled. Everyone is smiling. Everyone except me, because I hadn't even known it happened. I stared at those photos for nearly an hour, trying to understand how a grandmother becomes invisible, trying to understand how someone can be erased from their own family while still alive. That night I called Daniel. For once, I refused to stay silent. Why wasn't I invited? Silence. Then a tired sigh. Mom, you're making this bigger than it is. Bigger than it is. The words felt like a knife. I wasn't asking for money. I wasn't asking for attention. I simply wanted to celebrate my granddaughter's birthday. Yet somehow I was the problem, the inconvenience, the burden. That conversation changed something inside me. Not all at once, but enough. For the first time, I stopped blaming Vanessa entirely. Because no matter how controlling she was, no matter how manipulative she could be, the truth was unavoidable. Daniel was choosing this. Every time he stayed silent, every time he looked away, every time he allowed me to be excluded. He was making a choice, and those choices were slowly leading us toward the day he would stand in front of the entire neighborhood, look me in the eyes, and tell me to go live my own life. But before that day arrived, there was one final betrayal, the betrayal that involved money. And that betrayal would cost far more than anyone expected. A few months after Lily's 8th birthday, something unexpected happened. Daniel started calling again. At first, I didn't think much of it. One phone call, then another, then weekly conversations. For the first time in years, he seemed interested in my life. He asked how I was feeling, asked about my garden, asked whether I needed help around the house. I should have been suspicious, but I wasn't. Because when you're a mother, hope is a dangerous thing. Even after disappointment, even after heartbreak, part of you always wants to believe things can be fixed. Part of you always wants your child back. So when Daniel started showing up again, I welcomed him with open arms. One Saturday afternoon, he spent nearly 4 hours helping me clean out the garage. We laughed, shared old memories. I even looked through childhood photographs. For a little while, everything felt normal, the way it used to, the way I had missed for so many years. As he flipped through an old photo album, he stopped at a picture of himself standing beside his father. He stared at it quietly, then smiled. Dad would have loved Lily. My throat tightened. He absolutely would have. For a moment, I saw the old Daniel, the boy I remembered, the son I missed, the son I thought I'd lost. That evening after he left, I sat on my porch smiling. Maybe people really could change. Maybe families could heal. Maybe I had been wrong. A week later, Daniel invited me to dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just dinner. The gesture meant more to me than he probably realized. We met at a small restaurant near his office. Halfway through the meal, he seemed nervous. I noticed him checking his phone repeatedly, avoiding eye contact, fidgeting with his napkin. Finally, he sighed. Mom, can I ask you something? There it was, the real reason for dinner. I felt it immediately. Still, I smiled. Of course. He leaned forward. Vanessa and I have an opportunity. I listened quietly. He explained that they wanted to purchase a larger home, a beautiful property in an exclusive neighborhood, better schools, more space, a better future for Lily. The bank had approved most of the financing, but they needed additional money for the down payment, about $70,000. I nearly dropped my fork. $70,000. For most people, that's a large amount. For me, it represented nearly everything: years of savings, emergency funds, retirement security, the safety net I'd spent decades building. Daniel immediately began reassuring me. We'll pay it back, every penny. It's just temporary. You know I'd never take advantage of you. Those words stayed with me. You know I'd never take advantage of you. I wanted to believe them. God help me, I did. Because he wasn't just asking for money, he was asking for trust. And mothers are conditioned to trust their children, even when they shouldn't. I told him I needed time to think. That night, I barely slept. $70,000. The number echoed through my mind. I walked through every room of my house, thinking, remembering, calculating. The logical part of me said no. The emotional part of me saw the little boy who once hugged me on Christmas morning. The emotional part won. A week later, I wrote the check. When Daniel saw it, his eyes widened. For a moment, he looked genuinely shocked. Then he hugged me tightly. Thank you, Mom. I still remember those words. I'll never forget this. The irony makes me laugh now, because forgetting was exactly what happened. The first few months were fine. Daniel sent updates, called regularly, keep me informed. The new house was beautiful, bigger than anything I had ever owned. Vanessa posted photographs constantly. New furniture, new landscaping, luxury appliances, expensive renovations. Every picture reminded me where my money had gone. Still, I didn't mind, not at first, because I believed repayment would come. 6 months passed. Nothing. 9 months. And nothing. A year. Still nothing. Eventually, I brought it up gently. Daniel smiled. We're working on it. Another 6 months passed. Same answer. Then new excuses appeared. Unexpected expenses, school tuition, property taxes, market conditions. Always something. Never repayment. One evening, I asked him directly, do you still plan to pay me back? The question seemed to irritate him. His smile disappeared. His posture changed. Suddenly, I felt like the unreasonable one. Mom, we're family. Family. Funny how that word only appeared when money was involved. I sat quietly, waiting. Then he added something that made my stomach turn. It's not like you're struggling. Not struggling? The words hit harder than he realized, because he had no idea how carefully I lived, how often I worry, how many things I postponed, how many sacrifices I still made. He saw a savings account. I saw security, independence, peace of mind, things I had spent decades building, yet somehow I was selfish for wanting them back. After that conversation, things changed again. The phone calls slowed, the visits became rare, the warmth disappeared, almost overnight. And that was when I finally understood something painful. The renewed relationship hadn't been reconciled. It had been preparation, the dinners, the phone calls, the attention, kindness. It all started shortly before he needed money, and it all ended shortly after he got it. For weeks, I tried convincing myself I was wrong. I tried convincing myself my son wouldn't do that. But deep down, I knew. I knew because mothers always know. And unfortunately, an even bigger betrayal was coming. One that had nothing to do with money. One that would happen in front of the entire neighborhood. One that would lead directly to the words that changed my life forever. Old woman, go live your life. And when those words finally came, they would destroy whatever hope I still had left. After the argument about the money, I tried something I hadn't done in years. I stopped calling. No reminders, no invitations, no attempts to fix things. I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped carrying the relationship by myself. The answer came quickly. Nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The phone stayed silent. No calls, no visits, no messages. It was a painful lesson, because it confirmed something I had been avoiding for years. I wasn't losing my son. I had already lost him. I simply hadn't accepted it yet. Then one afternoon, something happened that pushed me over the edge. I was at the grocery store when I ran into one of my neighbors, a kind woman named Carol. We chatted for a few minutes before she smiled and said something strange. I saw Daniel's new SUV yesterday. It's beautiful. I froze. New SUV? Carol nodded. The black one in the driveway. It looks expensive. I forced a smile. Oh, right. But inside, my stomach dropped. The moment I got home, I searched online. The vehicle Carol described cost more than $80,000. $80,000. My hands actually trembled because suddenly all those excuses made sense. The money wasn't available. The money wasn't tied up. The money wasn't delayed. The money was gone, spent, while my loan remained unpaid. I sat in my kitchen for nearly an hour staring at the wall, trying to calm down, trying to think clearly, trying not to cry. Then I made a decision. I would speak to Daniel face to face. One final conversation. One final opportunity. One final chance to be honest. The next afternoon, I drove to his house. The same house my savings had helped purchase. The same house I had sacrificed for. When I arrived, Daniel was outside washing the new SUV. The sunlight reflected off the glossy black paint. For a moment, I simply sat in my car looking at it, thinking about the years I worked double shifts, thinking about the jewelry I sold, thinking about every sacrifice that helped build the life he now enjoyed. Finally, I got out. Daniel looked surprised. "Mom," I nodded. "We need to talk." His expression immediately changed, the way it always did whenever accountability entered the conversation. "What about?" "You know what about." I could see annoyance spreading across his face. I hated that look. Not because it was disrespectful, because it was familiar. I've seen it too many times. The look of someone who believes your feelings are an inconvenience. I took a deep breath. "Daniel, I trusted you." His jaw tightened. "Mom, no, please let me finish." For once, I refused to back down. I reminded him about the loan, the promises, the repayment plan, the conversations we'd had, the trust he asked for. At first, he listened. Then he started rolling his eyes. That hurt more than the words that came later. Because eye rolls are what people do when they stop respecting you. Then Vanessa appeared. Of course she did. She stepped outside carrying a drink, immediately sensing conflict, immediately taking her position beside him. Not behind him, beside him, like a lawyer preparing for trial. "What's going on?" she asked. Daniel sighed dramatically. "Mom's doing this again. Doing this again." As though wanting honesty was somehow unreasonable. Vanessa folded her arms, the same way she always did, the same expression, the same judgment, the same superiority. And suddenly, years of frustration began pouring out of me. Not yelling, not screaming, just the truth. I talked about birthdays, the missed calls, the holidays, the broken promises, the granddaughter I barely saw, the loan, everything. Years of pain finally spoken aloud. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Vanessa laughed. Actually, I laughed. A short, dismissive laugh. And that's when something inside me broke. Not because of her, because of Daniel. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her to stop. He simply stood there, silent. Again, always silent. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You always make everything about yourself." The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Everything about myself? After everything I had given? Everything I had sacrificed? Everything I had endured? My voice shook. "Daniel, I'm your mother." And that's when it happened. That's when the entire neighborhood heard. That's when the moment arrived. The moment that would change both our lives forever. Daniel threw his hands into the air, his face red with frustration, and shouted, "Then stop acting like you're the center of my world." The street went silent. A dog stopped barking. A lawnmower shut off somewhere nearby. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Then he looked directly at me and delivered the words that would echo in my mind for months. "Old woman, go live your life." The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp, cruel. I could see curtains moving in nearby windows. People were watching, listening, witnessing everything. Vanessa stood there without saying a word. And somehow that made it worse, because she wasn't shocked. She wasn't surprised. Nothing. 9 months. And nothing. A year. Still nothing. Eventually, I brought it up gently. Daniel smiled. We're working on it. Another 6 months passed. Same answer. Then new excuses appeared. Unexpected expenses, school tuition, property taxes, market conditions. Always something, never repayment. One evening, I asked him directly, "Do you still plan to pay me back?" The question seemed to irritate him. His smile disappeared. His posture changed. Suddenly, I felt like the unreasonable one. Mom, we're family. Family. Funny how that word only appeared when money was involved. I sat quietly, waiting. Then he added something that made my stomach turn. It's not like you're struggling. Not struggling. The words hit harder than he realized, because he had no idea how carefully I lived, how often I worry, how many things I postponed, how many sacrifices I still made. He saw a savings account. I saw security, independence, peace of mind, things I had spent decades building. Yet somehow I was selfish for wanting them back. After that conversation, things changed again. The phone calls slowed, the visits became rare, the warmth disappeared, almost overnight, and that was when I finally understood something painful. The renewed relationship hadn't been reconciled. It had been preparation, the dinners, the phone calls, the attention, kindness. It all started shortly before he needed money, and it all ended shortly after he got it. For weeks, I tried convincing myself I was wrong. I tried convincing my son wouldn't do that. But deep down, I knew. I knew because mothers always know. And unfortunately, an even bigger betrayal was coming. One that had nothing to do with money. One that would happen in front of the entire neighborhood. One that would lead directly to the words that changed my life forever. Old woman, go live your life. And when those words finally came, they would destroy whatever hope I still had left. After the argument about the money, I tried something I hadn't done in years. I stopped calling. No reminders, no invitations, no attempts to fix things. I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped carrying the relationship by myself. The answer came quickly. Nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The phone stayed silent. No calls, no visits, no messages. It was a painful lesson because it confirmed something I had been avoiding for years. I wasn't losing my son. I had already lost him. I simply hadn't accepted it yet. Then one afternoon, something happened that pushed me over the edge. I was at the grocery store when I ran into one of my neighbors, a kind woman named Carol. We chatted for a few minutes before she smiled and said something strange. "I saw Daniel's new SUV yesterday. It's beautiful." I froze. "New SUV?" Carol nodded. "The black one in the driveway. It looks expensive." I forced a smile. "Oh, right." But inside, my stomach dropped. The moment I got home, I searched online. The vehicle Carol described cost more than $80,000. $80,000. My hands actually trembled because suddenly all those excuses made sense. The money wasn't available. The money wasn't tied up. The money wasn't delayed. The money was gone, spent, while my loan remained unpaid. I sat in my kitchen for nearly an hour staring at the wall, trying to calm down, trying to think clearly, trying not to cry. Then I made a decision. I would speak to Daniel face to face. One final conversation. One final opportunity. One final chance to be honest. The next afternoon, I drove to his house. The same house my savings had helped purchase. The same house I had sacrificed for. When I arrived, Daniel was outside washing the new SUV. The sunlight reflected off the glossy black paint. For a moment, I simply sat in my car looking at it, thinking about the years I worked double shifts, thinking about the jewelry I sold, thinking about every sacrifice that helped build the life he now enjoyed. Finally, I got out. Daniel looked surprised. Mom, I nodded. We need to talk. His expression immediately changed, the way it always did whenever accountability entered the conversation. What about? You know what about? I could see annoyance spreading across his face. I hated that look. Not because it was disrespectful, because it was familiar. I've seen it too many times. The look of someone who believes your feelings are an inconvenience. I took a deep breath. Daniel, I trusted you. His jaw tightened. Mom, no. Please let me finish. For once, I refused to back down. I reminded him about the loan, the promises, the repayment plan, the conversations we'd had, the trust he asked for. At first, he listened. Then he started rolling his eyes. That hurt more than the words that came later, because eye rolls are what people do when they stop respecting you. Then Vanessa appeared. Of course she did. She stepped outside carrying a drink, immediately sensing conflict, immediately taking her position beside him, not behind him, beside him, like a lawyer preparing for trial. What's going on? She asked. Daniel sighed dramatically. Mom's doing this again. Doing this again. As though wanting honesty was somehow unreasonable. Vanessa folded her arms, the same way she always did, the same expression, the same judgment, the same superiority. And suddenly, years of frustration began pouring out of me. Not yelling, not screaming, just the truth. I talked about birthdays, the missed calls, the holidays, the broken promises, the granddaughter I barely saw, the loan, everything. Years of pain finally spoken aloud. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Vanessa laughed. Actually, I laughed. A short, dismissive laugh. And that's when something inside me broke. Not because of her, because of Daniel. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct her. He didn't tell her to stop. He simply stood there, silent, again, always silent. Then he said something I'll never forget. You always make everything about yourself. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Everything about myself? After everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had endured? My voice shook. Daniel, I'm your mother. And that's when it happened. That's when the entire neighborhood heard. That's when the moment arrived. The moment that would change both our lives forever. Daniel threw his hands into the air, his face red with frustration, and shouted, Then stop acting like you're the center of my world. The street went silent. A dog stopped barking, a lawnmower shut off somewhere nearby. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Then he looked directly at me and delivered the words that would echo in my mind for months. Old woman, go live your life. The words hung in the air, heavy, sharp, cruel. I could see curtains moving in nearby windows. People were watching, listening, witnessing everything. Vanessa stood there without saying a word. And somehow that made it worse. Because she wasn't shocked, she wasn't surprised, always, until now. The moment he unlocked the front door, the silence greeted him. No television, no music, no movement, just silence. The kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that forces them to think. He walked into the kitchen, and there it was, the envelope, exactly where I left it, waiting. His name written across the front. Nothing else. No explanation, no warning. Just one word. Daniel. Later, he would tell people he almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity is a powerful thing, so he picked it up. I opened it and began to read. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The note said, Daniel, if you're reading this, then I have already gone. Not because I hate you, not because I want revenge, not because I stopped loving you. I left because I finally realized something painful. I spent years waiting for you to treat me with the same kindness I showed you. Years waiting for you to remember who I was. Years hoping things would improve. Instead, they became worse. You once told your kindergarten teacher that your mother was your hero. I still have the drawing you made, the one where you gave me a cape and called me the strongest person in the world. I kept it all these years because every sacrifice I made felt worthwhile when I looked at that picture. When your father died, I worked until my hands hurt. I skipped meals so you wouldn't have to. I sold things that mattered to me so you could have opportunities I never had. And I would do it all again. Every single sacrifice. Because being your mother was the greatest privilege of my life. What hurts is not what I gave. What hurts is what happened afterward. The birthdays you forgot, the holidays you excluded me from, the granddaughter I rarely got to see, the promises you broke, the loan you stopped acknowledging, and finally, the words you spoke in front of strangers. Old woman, go live your life. I want you to know something. Those words didn't break me, they woke me up. For years, I built my life around making sure you were happy. I forgot that my life belonged to me too. You reminded me. For that, strangely enough, I am grateful. So I took your advice. I went to live my life, not the life you wanted for me, my life. A life with peace, a life without begging for love, a life without waiting for invitations, a life without explaining my worth. You once promised that when you grew up, you would take care of me. You don't have to anymore. I release you from that promise. I release myself from it too. The $70,000 is forgiven. Keep it. Consider it the final gift from a mother who loved you more than herself. But understand something clearly. The money was never what I wanted back. What I wanted was my son. And that is the one thing you stopped giving me years ago. Do not search for me. Do not contact my lawyer. Do not ask friends where I went. This decision was not made in anger. It was made in peace. For the first time in a very long time. I hope one day you understand the difference. Take care of Lily. Teach her kindness. Teach her loyalty. Teach her not to measure people's value by what they can do for her. And if she ever asks about me, tell her the truth. Tell her I loved her very much. Tell her I never stopped loving any of you. Goodbye, Daniel. Love, Mom. By the time Daniel reached the last line, his hands were shaking. The kitchen blurred. The words refused to stay still. For several seconds, he simply stared at the paper, unable to move, unable to think, unable to breathe. Because for the first time, there was no argument to win, no excuse to make, no one else to blame. Just the truth, raw, undeniable truth. His wife walked into the room. What's wrong? Daniel didn't answer. She stepped closer. Then I saw his face. The color had drained from it. What happened? Still nothing. Finally, he handed her the note, and as she began reading, something unexpected happened. Daniel started crying. Not the angry tears of frustration, not the defensive tears of guilt, real tears, the kind that comes when denial finally dies. Because suddenly he could see everything: the birthdays, the forgotten calls, the excuses, the humiliations, the distance, the years. For the first time, he wasn't remembering isolated moments. He was seeing the entire pattern, and it terrified him. Then he noticed something else. The house felt different, empty, permanent. He rushed into the bedroom. The closet was half empty, the drawers were cleared, the photographs were gone, the suitcase was gone. I was gone, really gone. That's when panic arrived. The note had answered one question, but it created another. Where was I? And for the first time since I became his mother, my son was the one being left behind. The first person Daniel called was me, straight to voicemail. He called again and again and again. Nothing. By the 10th call, panic had completely replaced pride. By the 20th call, panic had become fear. For years, I had always answered, no matter how busy I was. no matter how hurt I felt, no matter what. This time was different. This time there was silence. The same silence I had lived with for years. Only now, Daniel was the one experiencing it. The next morning, he drove to my house. He searched every room, every closet, every drawer, as if somehow I might still be there, as if he could undo what had already happened. But there was nothing to find, because I had truly left. The following week became a blur. He called relatives, neighbors, friends, former coworkers, church members, anyone who might know where I was. No one told him, mostly because no one knew. The few people who did know respected my wishes. For the first time in my life, my boundaries belonged to me. Not to my son, not to guilt, not to obligation. To me. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, I was beginning again. The apartment wasn't large. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't impressive. But every morning I woke up smiling. The windows overlooked a small lake. Children fed ducks nearby. Older couples walked along the shoreline. People greeted each other. People smiled. People noticed one another. The simplicity felt healing. For the first few weeks, I slept more than I had in years. Not because I was tired, because my nervous system finally felt safe. No waiting for disappointment. No checking my phone. No wondering if I mattered. No hoping for invitations. Just peace. One afternoon, I joined a local book club, something I had always wanted to do. Another week, I enrolled in an art class, then a gardening group, then volunteer work at a community center. Little by little, I remembered who I was. Not Daniel's mother, not Vanessa's inconvenience, not someone's forgotten obligation, just Evelyn. And it felt wonderful. About 2 months after I left, Richard called, my lawyer. Evelyn, there's something you should know. I already knew what was coming. Daniel? Richard sighed. He's been calling constantly. Apparently, Daniel had visited his office several times, requested meetings, asked questions. I wanted answers. Richard politely refused, as instructed. Then he told me something unexpected. He's crying, Evelyn. I didn't respond. He looks broken. Again, I said nothing. Not because I didn't care, because I did. That's what made it difficult. No matter what happened, Daniel was still my son. Part of me would always love him. But love and access are not the same thing. Love and trust are not the same thing. Love and reconciliation are not the same thing. Some lessons arrive too late. A few weeks later, another surprise arrived. A letter, handwritten, addressed to me. The handwriting belonged to Daniel. I stared at the envelope for nearly an hour before opening it. Inside was a simple letter. No excuses, no blame, no defensiveness. For the first time in years, just honesty. He apologized for everything. The birthdays, the holidays, the silence, the humiliation, the loan, the words, especially the words. He admitted he had become someone he didn't recognize, someone his father would have been ashamed of, someone he was ashamed of. At the bottom of the letter, he wrote one sentence that stayed with me. I spent years thinking you would always be there. I cried when I read that, because that was the heart of everything. Not cruelty, not hatred, assumption. The assumption that mothers never leave. The assumption that forgiveness is automatic. The assumption that love means endless tolerance. Many people spend their entire lives learning that's not true. Daniel learned it in one painful season. Months passed. Then something happened that I never expected. Lily wrote to me, a real letter, written in careful handwriting. She was old enough now to understand some things. Not everything, but enough. She told me she missed me, missed my stories, missed my cookies, missed our afternoons together. Near the end of the letter, she asked a question. Grandma, did I do something wrong? That sentence shattered me because children always blame themselves for things adults create. I wrote back immediately, the longest letter I had written in years. I told her she had done nothing wrong. I told her she was loved. I told her she was precious. And I promised I would never disappear from her heart, no matter where I lived. Over time, letters became phone calls. Phone calls became visits. Slowly, carefully, I rebuilt a relationship with my granddaughter. A healthy relationship, one built on honesty instead of obligation. As for Daniel, things took longer, much longer. Trust grows slowly, especially after it's broken. Nearly a year after I left, we met, in person, at a small cafe near my apartment. The moment I saw him, I noticed how much older he looked. Regret ages people. He stood as I approached. His eyes filled with tears. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." Not because someone told him to, not because he wanted money, not because he wanted something, because he finally understood. I listened, really listened, for over an hour. And when he finished, I thanked him, not for the apology, for honesty. Then I told him something important. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. It simply releases bitterness. The road back would be slow, if it happened at all. And for the first time in his life, Daniel accepted that answer. No arguments, no demands, no expectations, just acceptance. When we said goodbye that afternoon, he hugged me, the same way he used to when he was young, the same way he had before life became complicated. And as I watched him walk away, I realized something. Leaving had never been about punishing my son. It had been about saving myself. The greatest surprise? Saving myself may have been the only thing that eventually saved him, too. Today, I still live beside that lake. I still volunteer. I still garden. I still read. I still smile. And every morning when sunlight enters my apartment, I think about the words that changed everything. Old woman, go live your life. My son meant those words as an insult. The greatest mistake he ever made was giving me exactly the advice I needed, because I finally listened, and for the first time in decades, I truly lived my life. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Evelyn's position, would you have left after hearing those words? Or would you have stayed and tried one more time to save the relationship? Share your answer in the comments below. I read as many of your stories and opinions as I can, and some of your experiences are just as powerful as the stories we tell here. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional family stories about betrayal, forgiveness, second chances, and finding the strength to choose yourself when life gives you no other choice. Remember this. Sometimes the people we love the most teach us the hardest lessons. And sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I'll see you in the next story.